lies will be exposed.
All right, cheers and salutations. Welcome everybody to Hard Lens Media. We got ourselves a very special show today, and joining me for a co-host for being an interview for this interview, we have none other than good friend of the show, Indy from INN. Indy, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing, my friend?
Good morning, my brother. Who are these people?
Who are these people? And now, but the thing is, it's not just Indy. We actually have an award-winning journalist. She has done some phenomenal work with RT, Mint Press News, and other news outlets. She has been one of the most outstanding voices out there when it comes to covering and exposing, unfortunately, war crimes that are out there, as well as other horrific instances taking place in this neoliberal nightmare. Joining us here, first time on the show, Vanessa Beeley. Vanessa, thank you so much. We understand time is short. So for our viewers and subscribers, can you please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your work, and just please share with the people. Welcome to Hard Lens Media.
Thanks for having me on. I apologize immediately for the dog drinking in the background. There's not much I can do. She always does this as soon as I start speaking. Well, basically, I mean, I'm an independent journalist and photographer. I guess it all started back in 2012 when I was in Gaza, and I went back in 2013, and then have been very focused on the regime change war in Syria, but, you know, pretty much across the whole of the Middle East. I guess that's where my expertise, if it can be called that, lies. But I have also been, obviously, to Iran a couple of times, and to Russia, to Donbass in 2022, to as part of the delegation to observe the referendum there. So that's it, really.
All right.
Wow,
well,
you got to see the elections. I didn't realize that. That's wild.
Yeah, in when was it? November 22, 2022.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't realize you were there at that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Vanessa, by the way, is based in Damascus, Syria. For those who don't know, I'm not hopefully giving up any OPSEC there.
No.
But yeah, I mean, you report from inside the belly of the beast, from a Western kind of perspective, from a Western background. But you live there. That's your home, and you see what's happening and what's been happening, not just since October 7th. And God, how many times do we have to say that this didn't start October 7th? But that, you know, for years and years, you've been, and your family has been calling this out and challenging Zionism, and we deeply appreciate that. And I'd love if you could kind of talk a little bit about kind of how you've seen this evolve over the last, you know, your 10, 12-year career already in journalism. Before that, what you observed, what got you into and kind of motivated you to want to start writing about this. Probably just seeing it would be my guess, but I want to hear it from you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, not necessarily my whole family, but my father in particular was, according to colleagues that came after him, was kind of one of the last real Arabists in the UK or in Britain. So I kind of grew up in an environment where my father had always supported the Palestinian cause. He'd always argued against the Zionist European Jew settler movement coming into Palestine, even post-Second World War. So without dwelling too much on that, you know, I kind of grew up in that environment. I didn't actually follow it too closely at that time. You know, when you're a teenager and your dad's always banging on about the same thing. But I kind of came back to it after he died in 2001, and I inherited his confidential papers and diaries, and I started to go through them because my dad was quite an enigmatic guy. He wasn't someone that opened up very easily. So for me, this was like a whole new journey. And basically that brought me in, when was it, 2010, 2011, and thinking about going back to Egypt, because as a kid, I'd been with my father there when he was ambassador under President Gamal Abdel Nasser. after the 67 war, of course, when the Zionist entity basically occupied areas of the Middle East that it still occupies, including Gaza. And so then I went to Egypt, and then I went to Gaza, and I had to enter by the tunnels because basically the Rafah border, although it is ostensibly under the control of the Egyptians, of course it isn't. It's under the control of the Zionists. And although I had all the paperwork necessary, I was spun from the official border. So in the end, at my second attempt, I went through the tunnels, and 2 days after I arrived in Gaza, the Israeli aggression of 2012 began. And of course, there was no exit because I'd entered effectively illegally. So I couldn't go back out through the tunnels because Israel was bombing the tunnels at the time. And I had no intention of trying to leave anyway, because, you know, my whole reason for being there was to stand in solidarity with Palestinians. And at that time, I was working more as an activist. But then, you know, when you see the slaughter and the hideous living conditions for the Gazan people then in 2012, I mean, nothing compares to what is going on right now. But you can't unsee that level of slaughter and indiscriminate killing and massacre of entire families. That has always been the MO of the Zionist entity, is basically to slaughter an entire family, to wipe out an entire family with one bomb. And that we saw even in 2012. And as I said, you can't unsee that. And then in 2013, you know, it became apparent what was going on. When I was in Gaza, it became apparent what was going on in Syria. So Eva Bartlett, who's another amazing on-the-ground journalist, had set up the Syria Solidarity Movement. She invited me to join it, and then the journey went from there, really. And I ended up getting into Syria as a journalist first of all, as part of a delegation. I was the only British person on an American peace delegation. And then that basically opened the door for me to be able to come back in quite a few times as a journalist, sort of covering events in Syria, including the liberation of Aleppo in December 2016, the liberation of Ghouta in eastern Damascus in 2018, and various other military fronts against the terrorists that were backed by the US and the UK, the EU and the Gulf states, etc., that had invaded Syria from 2011 onwards.
You know,
so, you know, I think really once it's been very much an educational journey for me. And that's, I guess, the message that I always try to pass on. I'm nobody special. I'm just somebody that saw what I saw and decided that I had to do something about it. And once you actually make that kind of decision, life kind of takes over. And the more you see, the more you learn, the harder it is to kind of get off that path, wherever that path is taking you.
Wow. And you were there in 2018 when the white helmets and the, you know, all of the whole you know, you did a lot of debunking of that narrative as well. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you were out there reporting from the ground, you know, the entire time.
You're talking about the alleged chemical attack in Douma in April.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Right. So
could you elaborate?
Correct the record.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was actually on the ground, and in fact, one interesting little factoid was the day before this, you know, staged event was produced by the White Helmets, and the White Helmets I'd been exposing since 2016, I think, or late 2015. I wrote my first series on them. But I also have to give credit to Corey Morningstar, who actually first sort of put out the information about the White Helmets and the entire Soros-controlled complex that was running the information on Syria in order to manufacture consent for regime change and to provide whitewashing for the terrorist groups that were under the control of the regime change cartel. But so I was in Damascus, and we'd been going on media tours to the recently liberated areas, and one of those was actually, I can't remember if it was, yes, it was Duma itself. And we'd seen, and I was there with CNN's Frederick Pleitgen, and a number of other journalists also, and we had gone to a few terrorist weapon manufacturing sites, and even, which, you know, seemed to be legit, a sort of chemical weapon, small scale manufacturing site where they were making grenades with chlorine inside and so on. And we found, or there had been found, a number of notebooks showing instructions on how to make these, as I said, small scale explosive devices with chemicals inside them. And the next day, the attack happened, or the alleged chemical weapon attack happened, and Frederick Pleitgen immediately, you know, went on air to effectively say that the Syrian government had carried out this attack. So I went after him on then Twitter and asked him why he hadn't mentioned any of the facilities that belonged to the terrorist groups that we'd seen the day before. He instantly blocked me. So that did. So that was quite funny, but I haven't sort of allowed him to forget it. You know, I mention it in every single interview that I can, because, you know, he was so clearly there to run the story. Because there was actually, and I wrote about it, somebody tipped me off about a month ago when I was again in eastern Damascus to another chemical event that had been staged, but actually it was derailed by civilian protests and callings for it out in support of the Syrian Arab Army. So it was basically, they backed off. But the interesting thing was the media had run with it, right? Because obviously they'd been told this is going to happen, so you've got to run with this story. And then suddenly they all started backpedaling, and it died a death. So it was kind of interesting that, again, here's a mainstream media journalist on site at just the right moment that they put out this propaganda against the Syrian government, as the Syrian government is on the verge of liberating the last district of eastern Damascus, in other words, on the verge of victory, and it uses chemical weapons against its own civilians that it's trying to liberate. The whole story is so utterly ridiculous. And actually, yeah, I mean, I think Robert Fisk, who, of course, has passed,
may
was
rest
one
in
of the
peace,
first. Yeah, he was one of the first journalists in, and I went in a few days after him. But he was, again, you know, he's been quite critical of the Syrian government, but he was very honest in this case. I mean, he sort of said, like, there was no evidence of a chemical attack. And at that time, I was in contact with the head of the, I guess it's the Reconciliation Center, the Russian Reconciliation Center. And he had gone into the building on the day of the attack without any sort of hazmat suits or gas masks or anything. And he basically messaged me and said, there's nothing.
Wow.
So, you know, it was very apparent from very early on that this was totally fabricated. And then when I spoke to hospital staff at the medical center where all these victims were supposed to have arrived, they all told us that the white helmets had come running in, staging it. They basically brought people in who were suffering with normal smoke inhalation, because of course the area was under heavy artillery firing and firing also by the terrorist groups. So there was a lot of smoke, there was a lot of debris around. I mean, it was sort of, you know, a pretty dilapidated area by the time we got into it. And so people were suffering from smoke inhalation because they were hiding in the basements. But that was it. That was all, you know, that was all that happened.
So now going forward, obviously we are witnessing the impact of this horrific crisis that's happening in Gaza. Unfortunately, it's abundantly clear that nothing is going to cease, nothing is going to be halted, as much as we want there to be a ceasefire or peace, which I see never happening around the horizon. Now there's talk of the potential future, and you wrote this article on May 10th, Gaza 2035, which is a long way from now, but not too far away. I just want to pull up this article, but essentially, while we still have time, because I know you'll have to be heading out very, very soon, could you at least elaborate to our viewers and subscribers the significance of this? Well, very unfortunate, grim, dark future that seems to be quite possible. Can you please elaborate for our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, you know, people tend, I was having a discussion quite recently with someone here. The assumption is that Netanyahu is irrational, that the entire administration is irrational. But my argument always is it's irrational to us because we don't share their psychology, but for them, or their ideology, but for them, as a supremacist, you know, would-be master race, it's perfectly logical what they are planning. I mean, if you remember, and this ties into this article that you mentioned, the Gazan dystopia, which was based on a report released in Israeli media. And for me,
right.
yeah. And there were a number of similar plans and projects and so on, but this was the one that kind of stood out to me, because if you remember recently, Netanyahu was in the UNGA and he held up the two maps. One map was the blessing and one map was the curse. And the curse is, of course, all of the so-called resistance access countries. The blessing is effectively the IMEC, the India Middle East Economic Corridor. Now, the India Middle East Economic Corridor goes from Mumbai through the Gulf states, which of course have already, most of them have normalized relations, either officially or unofficially, with Israel. And it runs through Gaza and then into El Arish in Egypt. And from there, the goods or the cargo is shipped to Europe. So in other words, it's in competition, or it's designed to squeeze out the Belt and Road Initiative of China, or, for example, the Russian-backed pipeline from Iran through Iraq through Syria. All of these projects that threaten US unipolarity are to be challenged by other projects that, in this case, of course, are being heavily backed by Israel. And in that plan, this is very much integrated, because Gaza then becomes divided into 5 cantons, which is what is going on now, the 5-finger plan, which of course was also formerly Ariel Sharon's plan back in 2005. And we're seeing now the destruction of the north in Jabalia, Beit Lahiya, etc. And the return to the Nevatim crossing, which goes from east to west in Gaza. And the idea is to establish kind of safe zones for Gazans, where they can live, provided they relinquish any kind of resistance. But again, they, in my view, if interpreting this, they will be prisons within prisons. So they will be enclosures where these Palestinians can live in certain areas of Gaza, which will be resettled by the Zionist settler movement. It will be managed, as it says in the plans, but now, of course, we're also seeing the idea that I think Moti Kahana, who's a sort of Zionist influencer based in the US, I think in Chicago, who was also instrumental in the plans to take over the south of Syria. But he's now talking about spending 200 million on bringing in basically US and UK mercenaries to manage Gaza post-war. So
yeah, I heard
you know,
CIA even.
Yeah, CIA, but actually it's interesting because the organization he's talking about is Constellas, and Constellas kind of absorbed organizations like Blackwater into its complex. And so I saw an article following my reporting on this last week in the Telegraph. So also talking about the fact that UK mercenaries might also be involved. And interestingly, James Lemessurier, the British former military intelligence officer who founded the White Helmets that you mentioned, also used to be a project manager or director for an organization called the Olive Group that then also got absorbed into Constellas. So I think, you know, what always comes up is this vast intelligence complex that has been responsible for infiltrating Syria, for infiltrating Lebanon, for infiltrating Yemen. You'll see them pop up time and time again in all the different projects as we move through what's going on at the moment. And so, you know, Gaza then basically just becomes an industrial free zone. And the Zionists would have use of Palestinian gas off the coast of Gaza and the gas off the coast of the occupied territories. And also, of course, there's also gas reserves off the coast of Lebanon and off the coast of Syria. So it becomes very evident what they're working towards. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to achieve it, of course. But when you look at what they're doing in Gaza, they're trying to create this free trade zone. But also at the same time, of course, what are they doing? They're increasing their military industrial profits because they're selling their surveillance technology. They're selling their AI. They're selling their genocide equipment on the back of
drones,
the slaughter of Palestinians. Yeah.
Wow. So now going forward, because I think we're getting close to the time, but I just want to just ask you, in regards to any future projects or works that you are, working in collaboration with, things that you want to share with our viewing audience members. Is there anything that we should be aware of so that we could follow you on social media and more importantly, support your work, as you have done a lot of phenomenal work? And I encourage everyone to please follow Vanessa on all her social media. So is there anything real quick that you want to promote or anything that's going to be happening within the next few days?
In the next few days, who knows? Iran could attack Israel. Israel could attack Syria. I mean, it's moving incredibly fast at the moment. And it's interesting that having attempted an invasion of southern Lebanon, which is failing dismally, but of course they are still heavily bombing Lebanon. And the plan is not necessarily to take physical occupation of the territory right now, in my opinion. The plan is to destroy as much as they can, to reduce these resistance countries and factions back to, as they always say, back to the Dark Ages. And of course, very much, that's what the war against Syria did to a large degree. I mean, Syria didn't fall, but it's still occupied on, 3 sides of its borders. It still has US occupation of its oil by US proxy, whether it's the Kurds or ISIS, and the US directly. The Northwest is still occupied by Al-Qaeda, that's running an intensified military front now against the Syrian Arab Army in the Northwest, in collaboration with Israel, as they always have been in the North. Turkey is still occupying in the South. Of course, Israel is still illegally occupying the Golan territories, which Trump tried to give to them under his last administration. And he actually admitted that he's bartered the Golan Heights for, what's her name, Miriam Adelson's support. Right. So, I think I think one message that I really want to try and get across to people is it's very easy to think this war is like really far away, and yes, it's horrible what's happening in Palestine, but it doesn't actually affect us, and it doesn't affect our election choices. But I'm going to say something now, that the people, and it is the people of these countries who are resisting occupation by the Zionist movement, the Zionist ideology, which of course is backed and sponsored by America, by the UK, by the EU. This entire movement, if it's not contained here, and if it's not stopped here, it will eventually be in control of every single country in the world. And the technology that you're seeing being used against Gazans, we talked about the AI, the drone surveillance, the drone bombs, the drone snipers. Killing is becoming remote control more than ever. And the surveillance, the apartheid, the living in smart cities, this is all going to become normal if Zionism isn't stopped here. Because if you look at what Israel is building in Nagorno-Karabakh in Azerbaijan, which was previously Armenian and is now effectively being, to a degree, ethnically cleansed, because Israel is building smart cities in this area. Why? To contain the Armenians that stay in that area. Exactly what they're doing in Gaza, but with a far more savage, tone to it. And for sure, the war is going to come to Syria from Israel. The rhetoric right now is against Assad. In the last few days, they're talking about they're going to come after Syria, they're going to come after Assad because Hezbollah is operating from inside Syria, the Iraqi resistance is operating from inside Syria, Iran is operating from inside Syria, so Syria effectively needs to be, they didn't succeed in destroying it during the regime change war, which Israel also backed. So now they're creating the pretext again, in my opinion, to come after Syria again. They've bombed all of the exits from Syria to Lebanon. I can't even leave Syria now because they've bombed all of the borders, all of the border roads. So,
wow.
When the war isn't going to be contained, in my opinion, in Lebanon, because Israel's ultimate goal, and
the
for it
Greater
to
Israel
achieve
Project.
victory, yeah, even if it's not a Greater Israel Project, I go back to that curse map. It doesn't necessarily mean occupation of these territories. It does mean the theft of resources, and it does mean the reduction of these countries to failed states. In my opinion, it means destroying the infrastructure, destroying hospitals, water, schools, everything that is essential to human life. They will attempt to destroy. Well, this is my interpretation of that.
We are ever hopeful to follow your work and see more things that you produce. For everyone that's not watched or who hasn't seen this live stream, we will be posting her Substack that will be available for everyone to see. Vanessa, you have done a lot of great work. So here's her Substack. Please, everyone, I will be posting a link in the live stream chat so all of you can subscribe and follow her great work. And more importantly, I guess we here at Hard Lens Media want to thank you for your time. Please be safe. And we are ever hopeful to see future projects and reporting that the people around the world need to hear of. I want to thank my colleague, Indy, for joining me for this interview. And please take good care of yourself and all the best. We will be continuing on with the rest of our main show after this short break. But again, thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Indy, for joining us.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.
All right. Farewell.
It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Whether or not in Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
I don't mean to sound alarmist, but most of what they let you read is garbage. Most of it's designed to warp our minds until subconsciously you find you'll take the time to lick their boots free of grime and wipe their minds free of tarnish. Oil is the centerpiece, a body count of millions is the garnish. So how's it feel to know we funded every carcass? That every year our taxes pay for carpet bombing Gaza under shroud of darkness? Or that we spend enough a year to house and feed each homeless person in the streets on turning families in apartment buildings in the Middle East to bloody craters full of charred garments? And our media is silent at best. At worst, they can find it in themselves to call war crimes clashes and label children burned to ashes terrorists who played a stupid game and reaped the harvest. And every time we try to paint the truth, the news sends their slugs to suck off all the varnish and distort it into something harmless. See, the media will hang you by your feet and keep you half asleep. So yes, I'm here to set you free, but freedom won't be sweet because you'll fall 1,000 feet when I come cut you out your harness. They say those who dream the deepest fall the farthest. They also say that home is where the heart is. But if home for you is Gaza, Netanyahu's got you painted as a target. Perhaps it's not the impact, but it's what you see when falling that will hit the hardest. Maybe it's the sound of all those children crying out in those apartments that will hit the hardest. Maybe all those little bodies scattered in the dirt will hit the hardest. Maybe seeing human lives assigned such little worth will hit the hardest. Maybe it's the knowledge that you're paying for the darkest of atrocities committed on this earth that will hit the hardest. Maybe it's the knowledge that we give 10 million a day to oppressors who possess the kind of Medicare you'll die in debt before you see that's gonna hit the hardest. Maybe then you'll see you've always had more in common with the commoners whose slaughter we fund every day in Gaza than our senators and bosses. Maybe then you'll see our country never had a conscience. Maybe then the retroactive guilt will make you nauseous. Maybe what hits harder than the impact is the act of being conscious, of knowing your complicity and helplessness to try and stop the bloody deeds of Congress. And that no matter who's in office, America preserves its foreign interests by whatever means its greed demands, however monstrous. You see, we'll always need a place to drain our contras. And Biden's got a backup plan should harm befall the Holy Land. Wipe it off the map, he'll draw it back on with an iron hand. He demands an Israel or reasonable effigy to exercise democracy and colonize the Middle East. Regardless of the human cost of phosphorus atrocities, bought and paid with money they rerouted out the budget for the non-essential things like ever making Flint's water clean. So maybe what hits hardest is the day you see this country for its actual priorities. And never more no honest peace attempting sleep. Maybe then you'll look at politicians making speeches like a blood-encrusted beast espousing destiny to empty seats and fellow leeches. As the gauntlet of democracy extends its brutal reach, like a giant wave of trash come to crash on foreign beaches. Maybe build a base, throw a flag down and heavily pollute the region. Rape your ecosystems, gut your fauna and congratulate you on your new allegiance. Oops, we mean alliance. This is something mutual unless you're non-compliant. We stole something crucial on which you can be reliant. So maybe what hits hardest is the centrist saying both sides need to stop the violence. And those would be the very same centrists saying we should all accept police brutality, who hem and haw and clutch their fucking pearls and spend their time condemning riots. But very soon will come the day the centrists all get censored like the rest of us, and pious as they'll try to be, they won't stay quiet. But they'll just end up shouting in the void that they were also quick to render us subscribers. And it will be too late to light the fires. So far away tonight, they burn the spires of a region set ablaze for which you've paid for every pyre. Which is why your checks weren't all $600 higher. And call it foreign interests or American desires. This is why your checks weren't all $600 higher. Far away tonight, they burn the spires of a region set ablaze for which you've paid for every pyre. Call it foreign interests or American desires.